Hello America, how we doing today? Back out at the shop. Told you I was going to talk about transmissions and 18 speeds and 13 speeds and all the different, why so many gears, okay? Well, as y'all know, I've got that one video out there that's went viral. It's 8 million something now views, how to shift an 18 speed transmission. And I get all kinds of comments on that channel, on that video. Tons and tons of comments as to, what do you need 18 speeds for? That's just overkill. That's ridiculous. You don't need that many gears. Okay. Well, yeah, you do sometimes, I guess. You don't normally. What I was doing with my truck, running an empty trailer, pulling, bobtailing a lot and pulling empty trailers around, I didn't need all that. I could have got away with a 5-speed, because I didn't have any weight on that truck. But when the truck was built, it was the idea behind it was it might be a heavy haul truck or something. All right, let's go back in history. You go back to history when the old trucks back in the 20s and 30s, way back when, those were gasoline powered engines. Okay, gasoline engines, and they never drove more than about 30 or 40 mile an hour because they were on dirt paved, gravel roads. And they didn't have the big interstates and stuff like that back then, and those trucks didn't get up to high speeds. Some of them were even chain drive and stuff. They weren't high speed vehicles. No vehicles were back then. I mean, even your Indy race cars were only doing 100 mile an hour. And I mean, a Model T does what, 30 or 40 mile an hour? I mean, you get the idea. So trucks back then didn't need a lot of gears because they didn't go that fast, and they weren't hauling the heavy loads that they were today, and they had gas engines. Big difference, gas versus diesel. Gas engines can rev. They can idle at 700-800 RPM, and okay, and just like 350 Chevy can rev up to what, 6,500 or something, red line. So it's got this huge power curve, whatever, RPM range, so to say. And you can rev it way up to 5,000 RPM, shift gears, drop all the way down to 2,000 RPMs and keep on going, right? And you got this huge swing, okay? So you can have the gears spread out ratio-wise. You can have the gears spread out a lot further. As the trucks got bigger and heavier and whatever, and then they switched to diesel engines don't rev like a car engine does, okay? I mean, it depends on the kind of, it's internal combustion engine, yeah. But an internal combustion engine that's on a model airplane, a remote controlled model airplane, they rev to 30,000 RPM. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, these little bitty small motors. And they fly around, they sound like a bumblebee, Your Ferraris and exotic cars, Lamborghinis and stuff like that, they might rev to what, I don't know, 9,000-10,000 RPM, something like that. I don't know, I've never had one of those, but you get the idea. Motorcycle engines, like say a Hayabusa, they rev real high too, because they're small engines, small pistons, and they can rev real high. The bigger the engine is, the slower they revolve, okay? You'd never get the engine on, let's say, a cruise ship or something. One of those huge engines, it's in a Carnival Cruise Line cruise ship. Those kind of engines, they probably have 1,200 RPM as their max, okay? I don't know. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But the bigger the engine, the slower that they can rev, okay? But they have a lot of torque. So diesel engines don't work off of horsepower, they work off of torque, okay? So when you have a diesel engine, like in a modern truck today, they idle at about 700, 800, somewhere around in there. When you bump idle up to keep the oil pressure up. So when you're sitting still, you bump the oil pressure up just a little bit. So you hit the cruise control, and that pops the computer to tell it to idle up a little higher. It'll idle 900 or 1,000 RPM, okay? And that's to keep the oil pressure up so you don't burn the bearings, okay? So anyway, when you're driving down the road, you're at a stoplight and you're idling and you put it in gear and you take off and it revs up to 1,600, 1,800, something like that. and you go to shift into another gear, you only go from 1600 down to about 1400, 1350, somewhere around. It depends on the motor, it depends on what transmission you have, what the ratios are, but you don't rev it way up like in a car, like 4,000, 5,000 RPM. You just rev it up to about 1500, 1800, 1600, somewhere in that range. Each engine's a little different. A Cat will rev different than a Cummins, will rev different than a Pack car, will rev different than a Mercedes or a Volvo engine. Okay, they're all slightly different, but they're low RPMs. Well, if you only rev it up to 1800 RPM and you only have a 5-speed transmission, to get it into the next gear, you've got to come all the way back down to almost an idle, and there's no power at idle. Okay, you put it in and it lugs, glug, 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 you know, and so you need a gear closer together. So you put more gears in there. And what they would do is you'd get they kept getting bigger, like, you know, I don't know, years ago, 6-speed, you know, 8-speed, 9-speed. Oh, we got a 10-speed now. Well, then they got to where there's not enough place. You don't want to have a gate so close together, you know, all these different gates. So what they do is they put a splitter on there. You go through 5 gears, you split, and you go back through those 5 gears again, okay? And that's like a modern 9-speed, okay? The reason is to get the RPMs closer together, okay? Or the gear ratios closer together, so the RPM doesn't have to fluctuate so much. It doesn't have to rev way up. Now, granted, a regular diesel, like, you know, any semi today, you go in and sitting still and just floor it, and it'll go up to 2,000 RPM, but you don't want to do that to them, you know, as far as driving them normally, okay? You want to keep in that power band, okay? And that's where each motor has its own little, get out of here, wasp, has its own little specifications of where that power band is. So when you order a truck, it's not like going down to Ford or Chevy or Dodge or whatever and just ordering a truck and it comes with a 3-speed, 5-speed, 4-speed manual transmission, okay? My first pickup was a 73 Ford pickup and it had a 3-speed on the column, you know, 3 gears, but you could rev the thing up, you know, and it was a big block, so it had plenty of torque, okay? It had plenty of power to negotiate those three gears. Nowadays, these new modern trucks, like a new Ford pickup, has an automatic 10-speed. Why? They want to keep it in that power band for fuel mileage, okay? So, so what they did, they kept getting bigger and bigger transmission. They'd get a 9-speed, and then somebody come up with, hey, you got the low range and the high range, now let's put a splitter on there, and you go from, you know, 5 gears and then go up to the high range, and you got 4 gears up there, so that's 9 speeds. Well, then you split it in half, and that makes 18 gears. Well, you don't need all 18 gears, but you do kind of need, when you're in 18th gear and you've got a heavy load on, let's say a heavy haul truck, and you start to hit this little hill, you don't want to shift from 9th, 18th gear, 9th gear, it'd be the same gate. You don't want to shift from 9th down to 8th, which is a 300, 400 RPM range difference, okay? You just want to split half with that. So you go from 18th down to 19th, and you've only split 200 RPM instead of 400 RPM. You know, the engine doesn't have to grab as many RPM. So it's nice to have that little split in there on a lot of these transmission, on a lot of whatever. Well, before they came out with the big 13 and 18 speed transmissions, they had around 6 and 8 speed transmissions. And this is back in the 60s and stuff, okay? And somebody come up with the idea and says, hey, the biggest transmission we got now is this, you know, let's say 6-speed transmission. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to cut those ratios in, which is a 300, 400 RPM range difference, okay? You just want to split half with that. So you go from 18th down to 19th, and you've only split 200. And either, I don't know if it was directly attached to the, you know, transmission to transmission, or transmission's back here and it had a little short drive shaft in between them. I don't know. But anyway, you'd have your motor, your 6-speed transmission, and behind that you'd have your little 4-speed Browning. And what you could do with that Browning is, let's say I'm in 5th gear, I can use that Browning and I can cut that 5th gear, I can divide it up in 4 different ratios, okay? So you can be in 4th, 2nd, and then 4th, 3rd, or then 4th, 5th. I'm sorry, I got off there. 4th in the main transmission and 2nd in the Brownie. Shift from 2nd to 4th, okay? And then when you get revved up and you need to go to another gear, you take that fourth, put it back into first, put the fourth gear into fifth gear. You know, it gets complicated. It gets confusing. It's hard to explain. It's like I said, it's easier to just do it than it is to verbally explain it. Okay, but that's why they have so many transmission or gears in a big semi transmission, is because of the power band of a diesel is very small. Okay, the sweet spot, so to say. It's a low amount of RPMs. Okay, now that same power band might be the same on a Lamborghini, but it's over 1,000 all the way up to 11,000 RPM. So you got this huge variance in RPM range. Whereas a diesel, that range is very small, so you got to get the transmission that matches up to that. Now, do you need 18 speeds in a modern transmission today? Not really, but under certain circumstances, depends on what kind of motor. Now, when this 07 that I had, when it was built in 07, they were coming out with these high torque engines, okay? They were coming out with these 500 horsepower, most of the trucks were 1650 torque, and then they went to, they had an 1850 torque option. And it's how the motor, the size of turbo it has on it, and the kind of fuel pump it has on it, and all this kind of stuff. Depends on how big because you can say take the same block, same heads, everything's the same on the motor, but have a different turbo and a different fuel pump. And it will allow you to get so many horsepower out of it. Okay, you put a different turbo on it and you can get more horsepower. Well, if you get a certain horsepower range, you can actually tune the motor. You can get 1850 torque at it. And then there was even there was a 600 horse Cummins and a 600 Cat. It was a 16-liter motor. I don't know if they make those anymore. I doubt it. They made them for a while there in the 2000 range, 2000 to 2010, right along in there. They made a, I don't know what year, 97 to 05, I don't know exactly. But anyway, somewhere along in there, they made these 16-liter motors. And they were making 600 horsepower up to 625, I think, with 2050 torque, okay? The transmission people, they're building these transmissions and taking them over to the factories to be put in these trucks, and they're going, you're going to put this motor, a transmission behind that big motor? We're not going to warranty it, okay? This transmission is not strong enough to handle that big of a motor, okay? So, a lot of the early trucks, they would sell the truck, but there wouldn't be any warranty on the motor, or on transmission, I mean. So, there for a short time. And then, the transmission people, hey, we need to get better at this. So they'd go in and they'd take their 13 speed and they would change it around, make it into an 18 speed, and they'd put bigger bearings, tougher, stronger alloy metals and all this different stuff, and they'd bump up the toughness of that transmission to be able to handle that 2050 horsepower torque, okay, and 600 horsepower. And then they would warranty it. So when my truck, my 07, when it was built, that was the era when it had a 5 1/4, I think. It had a 5 1/4 cat motor in it and 1850 torque, and the only transmission at the time, the only transmission available that could handle that much torque, that 1850 torque and that 2050 torque, was that 18 speed. Now, after that, they went back and they redesigned the 13 speed and they made it available that could handle the 1850 torque. And then they went and probably made the 9 speed and the 10 speed, all these different other transmissions to where they could handle the 1850 torque too. So today they can handle that. But in 07, that was the transmission. If you wanted that big motor, you had to buy that transmission or you didn't get a warranty on the smaller transmissions because they wouldn't handle the torque. So that's some of the reasons they have 18 speed transmissions. No, you don't need all 18 gears. I mean, I start out in 3rd or 4th, and unless I'm in a parking lot and need to crawl real slow, I never use first gear. You start out in 3rd, sometimes 5th gear. If I'm bobtail, I'd start out in 6th or 7th. Whatever. So get the idea. So I don't know if that was confusing or not. Oh, I'm getting dry mouth, cotton mouth from talking too much. But you get the idea. There's reasons for why they put different vehicles together, okay? I used to have a Boss Hoss motorcycle, and it had 2 gears. It was an automatic transmission. It was actually it was a 1-speed automatic transmission on it, and you only needed 1 gear because it had 385 horsepower. I mean, this thing was a beast. 385 horsepower on a motorcycle, and yeah, I love that bike too, man. I hated to get rid of that, but anyway, it had one gear, one transmission gear. Now it did have a second gear, but it was a real weak gear. It's just put in there. And once you got up to speed, you kick it into second gear just to save fuel. That's all it was. And the transmission would break a lot because the second gear, guys would slam it into second gear and they'd strip the gears out on it because it wasn't designed for torque. It was just designed to lower your RPM so you get a little better fuel mileage on the highway. But yeah, that Boss Hoss, it would go from 0 to 100 in 1 gear. That's about the fastest I ever took the thing. I was kind of scared of it. So, anyway, with that, y'all be good. Take care. And I don't know if I enlightened anybody on this, but I kind of try to explain why to a lot of people, they don't understand why things are done. Like, for instance, in trucking, why do they build a truck that way? Why do you need 18 gears? Well, you don't really need 18 gears, but you do need, the gears that you do need, you need the ratios close enough together, okay? So to do that, they just took a 9-speed and then doubled it, which made it an 18-speed. Okay. Anyway, with that, I'm out of here. See y'all later. Take care. And I gotta go find something to do. So y'all take care. Bye.